it's like, do your kids watch cartoons or do cartoons watch the kid? And from like a parent's perspective, the cartoons are really watching the kid for us. Like
Cartoons. I mean, Luke, that's very 1980s. Don't you mean
well, we don't.
YouTube Kids on an iPad?
It's funny you say that because we don't even call it that in our household. We don't call it cartoons. We call it multiki, because my wife's Russian, and that's the Russian word for cartoon. That's what we call it. That's what our kids call it.
Multiki.
Yeah. So for me to call it cartoons is even kind of strange. But you're right. He's got YouTube Premium. Oh. He's a master at it. He like scrolls and like, chooses different things.
He's learned from the best.
He's very proficient.
Like before you know it, he'll be on the 3-hour Jordan Peterson lectures.
Yeah. It's sad because it's my subscription. So now like everything that's recommended to me whenever I want to watch cartoons, it's like 90% kid stuff and like 10% the stuff I'm interested in now, just by the sheer like volume of videos that he's just like clicking on.
Okay. I was almost going to say the opposite. It's like, to what extent are your tuned algorithmic recommendations forming his like?
Yeah, not at all. I totally outplay. I mean, just the number of clicks. He doesn't like watch things for too long, I guess.
Right.
Like there's I don't know if that's a good or it's probably a bad thing. But we try to limit it. This is kind of a little insight, but like when kids like watch cartoons, at least on like a TV, you can just look at their eyes and they're almost like zombies. And I really don't like that. I don't like that. So I'll like have them change it or like do something else. When they're watching like YouTube on an iPad though, they're much more engaged. They're like clicking on other stuff.
There's something interactive to it.
But then when you're playing games, they're even like more interactive. So you can see their brains are like actively moving. They're looking around the screen.
Right.
They're clicking stuff. There's often puzzles. There's like drawings and stuff. Anyway. And actually, I'm going to change my seat. I don't know if you've noticed. I don't know if you noticed, but I've started sinking down. This seat I'm sitting on is kind of old. Before I was up here.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to switch to my new one. Yeah, hold on. All right. Here's the proper commander's chair.
All right. So this, I'm like looking down here at my handwritten.
You got handwritten notes?
Just like throughout the day, whenever I hear something that might be interesting or a detail I want to remember, I just scribble it down real quick. That's why it's like when I have these, to me, they look very unfocused. I'm not sure how you read them, but I'm just like throwing stuff at the wall. But that said, this is probably going to be like one of the least structured ones that I've got so far.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm hoping that's a good thing and we can just kind of chat a little more.
Yeah. But, yeah, absolutely. I think it's, so the last episode so there was some stuff that I was talking about at the end of the episode that I moved forward because it just fit better. We were talking about the reasons why the Republicans wanted to kill the CFPB. I axed out like whole sections. I remember like before when I was thinking about how to structure these things, some of the, one thing I had was you have to set a hook and then the hook and the promise. So, the promise is kind of the question you're going to answer. Like, what is this about? What is the question that I'm going to have answered for you, the audience, by the end of this? And then the hook is just something like interesting, something juicy. And maybe that was didn't really have either, I guess, this last time.
I think my hook here tonight is probably going to be Justin Trudeau acting silly.
Yeah, you can just open with like a silly thing at Trudeau or something.
You know what? Yeah, that's a good idea. Let me just go ahead and do that.
Open up with the clip.
His response. This week, it's just like drama. It's just like catty back and forth drama. But there's a divergence between the two, and that's, kind of one of the things I wanted to talk about. But there's some entertaining back and forth.
So today, the United States launched a trade war against Canada. Their closest partner and ally, the closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively.
But yeah, so he comes out just like sighing.
Yeah, that's what I was giggling at.
Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator. Make that make sense.
So he goes into this thing, and it's extremely political. So he starts from the outset. The United States has started a trade war. And that's nothing to say about Canada's 250% tariffs and certain areas, but we'll leave that aside for just a minute. He tries to like turn the Americans like against them, or at least, convince them that, hey, this is all America's fault. You're going to suffer because of America.
Now, just like I did a month ago, I want to speak first directly to the American people. We don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you.
We don't want this, please. Your government has done this to you.
Right. Do you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of this really brilliant bit in South Park, where like Jimmy or something, he's got crutches. Not Timmy. I think it's Jimmy. He's got crutches, but he gets like totally roided up. And then he goes in a roid rage, and he's like beating up on someone. He's like, "Why'd you make me do this to you?" Yeah. Anyway, okay. So that's the angle.
We promised. We stuck to our word. And we did it because we believe in working together to protect our citizens. Now I want to speak directly to one specific American, Donald. Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
Probably not such a good idea to insult Trump directly, especially when you're kind of pleading with him. Very briefly, on the lead up to this, that speech was done the day that was done on Tuesday, March 4th, I believe. So that was the next deadline that the 25% tariffs across the board on Mexico and Canada were to go into effect. So that they were originally announced in the beginning of February. And then before they were to go in on February, at the last minute, a deal was reached with, between Trump and Canada and Trump and Mexico, and he postponed them for a month. So that was leading up until this week. And everyone was kind of thinking like, all right, well, he put it on China, but, pulled the rug out on the Mexico and Canada ones at the last minute. So there was this kind of like broad consensus that, people were kind of thinking and hoping that he was going to do the same thing, like North America stick together. I'm really targeting China here.
Wait, so just point of clarification, this happened the same time, the day after, before or after Trump postponed it?
This happened day of. So this time he did not postpone it. So
oh, okay. Got it.
It was scheduled to go into effect on Tuesday, March 4th. I think that's March 4th, right?
That's a Tuesday, yeah.
And so on Monday, everyone was like, well, what's going on? It's probably going to be fine, whatever. And then like Monday evening, like the same thing. He's doing his little signings and reporters are shouting questions at him. And they say, it's like, what can they do to avoid this? And he said the same exact thing last time. He said, nothing that can be done. But then on midnight, a couple hours after that, first minutes of Tuesday that day, they did go into effect. So everyone was pretty upset then the next day. And so that speech we watched was Tuesday afternoon, like lunchtime.
So they just went into effect.
Yeah. So they just
after having a bunch of question marks. Okay, got it.
Right. So people were very upset. Well, what did Mexico say? Nothing. They just said nothing.
Nice. Okay. And no speeches, nothing? No
speeches, no angry tweets, no. Like Trudeau he's struck this very combative tone every time there's something about tariffs or something about the 51st state. He always comes out with, strong fighting words. So there is a pretty strong contrast between the Canada and the Mexico response.
Interesting. Okay.
And then in terms of the timeline and, today's Friday. So where the dust actually settled on all of this. So Tuesday came and passed. Everyone's like, all right, well, this is happening now. Like the quotable on that day was something like, this is the biggest tariff decision in many decades because the aggregate number of imports that these tariffs applied to, like all of Mexico, all of Canada, and then an additional 20% on all of China. Like that base of trade flow was like $1.5 trillion. That's a big number. So Tuesday comes and passes, they go into place, and markets start kind of panicking a little bit. No one really knew what was going on. And then at the end of the day on Tuesday, like as the workday was closing, the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, he came out and gave some cryptic message saying something like, we might be doing something with this. In fact, President Trump, as soon as tomorrow, might look at some sort of postponement. So then all of a sudden, and then like going into Wednesday, everyone's like, okay, all right, we're good. And then all day long, he doesn't do anything still. And then by the end of the day, he puts an exemption on, I think, cars, autos between the two countries. And then Thursday comes, they're still mostly in place.
Well, let's see it. This is mostly Trump, though, right?
Yes, mostly Trump, but I think a lot of it was like, so Trudeau gave that video on Tuesday, and he called Trump dumb to his face in front of the world. Like,
yeah, he did.
How's that going to go over with a guy like Trump?
Here we go.
Justin Trudeau of Canada called me to ask what could be done about tariffs. I told him many people have died from fentanyl that came through the borders, Canada and Mexico. Nothing has convinced me that it has stopped. He said that it's gotten better, but I said, that's not good enough. The call ended in a somewhat friendly manner, ! He was unable to tell me when the Canadian election is taking place, which made me curious. Like, what's going on here? Then I realized he's trying to use this issue to stay in power. Good luck, Justin. So there's really a lot in there, and not just him, like, or he's typing out filler words.
Yeah, like, that's like, pretty great. The punctuation, the commas, not to get into this, just the use of commas. But again, I don't think he even types this. He doesn't type this. I think he's got someone else doing it. I think he's there. He's there. He's like in the room and he reads it and like he approves it or whatever. He dictates. But he's not doing the punctuation. He's not. It doesn't.
I don't know. It's like we talked.
It doesn't matter. But I'm like, I look at these.
I think it doesn't matter because I think it's like he's dictating it with the little thing saying like.
No, do you think he's going like get rid of that? Yeah, you think he's being like capitalize this, comma here, saying, comma there?
Yeah, capitalize borders and borders of Canada, or like F and fentanyl. At any rate, so this is a day after he got called dumb, so he's wasn't so happy. 2 months ago, like the first business day of the year, Trudeau effectively resigned from being prime minister. So he's still there, but he kind of declared that he's not running for re-election because it became clear he's got effectively no chance of winning again. So he said, I'm stepping down. I'm going to wait around now until
a lame duck.
Yes, he's a lame duck. And then 3 minutes after that one, for anyone who is interested, I told Governor Justin Trudeau of Canada that he largely caused the problems that we have with them because of his weak border policies, which allowed tremendous amounts of fentanyl illegal aliens to pour into the United States. These policies are responsible for the death of many people. So on the next day, they did reach an agreement to exempt all goods that fall within the USMCA agreement. So it took a couple of days, but eventually they got there. But one of the things that I found to be pretty interesting, the difference between Mexico and Canada. Mexico really didn't come out with anything on Tuesday when they went into effect. No major comments. I think the president gave some indications like we're in wait and see mode. I think she anticipated this kind of outcome was going to take place, but she's done a very good job managing Trump. And Trudeau is on the opposite extreme. He's just done a totally terrible job, insulting him.
Are there elections? Sorry. Do you know of any elections coming up in Mexico?
No. In fact, the current president was just elected,
right.
I think the second half of last year. So she's still quite new. So she's trying to prove herself still. And in this respect, she's actually done a really nice job, for the Mexican people in dealing with Trump, at least. But one of the things that is cited on both sides is this fentanyl number. Claudia Sheinbaum, that's the president of Mexico, she waited a couple of days and then had a phone call with Trump on Thursday, and she more or less convinced him that, so they had a phone call on Thursday, and apparently she emphasized to him that, okay, this is a problem, the fentanyl is a problem, but we've been doing what we can to combat this, and we've been showing steady improvement. And so on the U.S. Customs and Border Protection data set, apparently she was using this U.S. data directly. So this is filtered for southern border drug seizures for fentanyl. So this lighter orange line is the over last year. So it's been bumping around over about 2,000. Yeah, so 2,000 pounds of fentanyl per month. But then whenever you look at this darker burgundy line into 2025, you see that starting to decline. So in fact, from about 2,000 already down to about 1,000. So this was enough. Effectively, she was able to kind of charm him into it a little bit.
Got it.
And
so her argument is basically saying that, so we're Mexico, and supposedly there's a bunch of drugs going up into the U.S. Mm-hmm. And, the U.S., even though they've potentially ratcheted up the amount of, effort that's going into seizing these drugs, they have been less successful in, seizing it, presumably because there's less crossing the border. So like when I first looked at this, I was like, well, drug seizure by month, it's going down. Doesn't that kind of like worse if there's so much? But from the U.S. perspective, the fact that they're less successful in capturing drugs suggests that Mexico is like sending less.
I think just in general, it's like, hey, this is a decrease in the number of drugs going across the border.
That's how I interpreted it anyway. I mean, if they showed him like this graph, for instance, and are like, look, you boys and girls at the border are successfully getting less of it, suggests that less of it is going over.
So the other metric that is a part of this is illegal crossings, which have plummeted drastically. So I think there's some degree of like, okay, these things kind of go together. But I just wanted to contrast with the amount that was not on the southern border, but on the northern border. All right, so let's see here. So this is where this comes from. So we got southwest border, just the past year. Let's see, fentanyl.
This is pretty cool. You should show this.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Do like a video of this or whatever. This is cool. I didn't know about this.
All right, so here's these Mexico numbers. So this was satisfactory to convince Trump to, you are trying, you're making progress. There's only 1,000 pounds of fentanyl.
Right. And what is that? That's like enough to kill every American like 50 times or something. Some ungodly.
Just something absurd. Yeah. All right. So southern, let's check out the northern border though. If you had to guess, how much fentanyl do you think is getting seized up north?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I have to say, just for my own prejudices and stuff, you got to assume it's less. Let's say how much is getting seized?
Yeah, I mean, just
let's go. I'd go 700.
700
last recorded month.
Yeah, I mean, Trump's saying Trudeau's not doing enough, so let's see how big it is.
Oh,
that's about 0.03 pounds. Trump said you're doing a terrible job, and so this is just pure politics.
Again, asterisk. It's being seized. We have other reports. It's just not getting captured because there aren't any people there. Yeah, I don't know. I get it though. Yeah. A lot of assumptions going under, people at home, a lot of assumptions you're putting on top of this thing. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
I know that's interesting. That's
interesting. But yeah, just like thinking about the data set itself, this is the reason he keeps citing. And so like Trudeau is making fun of him, whereas Sheinbaum is like zeroing in on his concern and, doing a much better job with messaging.
If that's the case, okay, interesting. I don't know. They're clearly working with some other data or some other information, unless they're just like completely just making stuff up. But if you're Trudeau, they're just like, look, there isn't any up here, so it's all BS. But he didn't take that route. He just said tariffs are dumb.
Like he has hammered the point that like there's really not that much. He does try to get into the rhetoric a little bit, but he's just too combative, I guess. So
Trudeau?
Yeah, Trudeau.
Yeah.
So Trump tweeted this about
interesting.
Mexico. After speaking with the president, I've agreed Mexico will not be required to pay tariffs on anything that falls under USMCA until April 2nd. So just, punting it for another month. I did this as an accommodation and out of respect for President Sheinbaum. Our relationship has been a very good one, and we are working hard together on the border, both in terms of stopping illegal aliens from entering the U.S. and likewise stopping fentanyl. Thank you, President Sheinbaum, for your hard work and cooperation.
That's nice.
So about an hour difference. Here's what he said to Trudeau. Believe it or not, despite the terrible job he's done for Canada, I think that Justin Trudeau is using the tariff problem, which he has largely caused, in order to run again for prime minister. So much fun to watch. Now on like Friday, the last day, the exemption for USMCA goods, that was like the core decision that's going to stay in place for the next month now. So in the context of all of these tariff conversations and comments, he's saying lots of different things, but the underlying he keeps going back to that we talked about in a previous episode were these reciprocal tariffs. And so he seems to be kind of zeroing in on that route. And like we said, it's a much cleaner way of doing it from a political perspective.
Right.
But he made some comment then it's like, oh yeah, April 2nd, but I think we might do it for Canada as early as today. And so this is the day after they were just fighting again online. So it's just a lot of silly back and forth, and I don't know, a lot of fun to watch, I think.
Got it.
And those trees are sold, but we're freeing it up on an emergency basis because Canada has been ripping us off for years on tariffs for lumber and for dairy products. 250%. Nobody ever talks about that. 250% tariff, which is taking advantage of our farmers. So that's not going to happen anymore. They'll be met with the exact same tariff unless they drop it. And that's what reciprocal means. And we may do it as early as today, or we'll wait till Monday or Tuesday. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to charge the same thing. It's not fair. Never has been fair. And they've treated our farmers badly. Look, our country's been ripped off by everybody.
And then he just keeps saying a lot of the same. But talking about reciprocal April 2nd, but he was saying right there, 250% tariff that currently exists in Canada. He said maybe we'll just match that today. So just being extremely combative.
We're going to bring back many of those plants and factories.
One day the tariffs are on, the next day they're off. Right now the markets, as you know well, prefer stability. Are you done going forward with the pauses and the carve-outs? Is that it for those?
There'll always be changes and adjustments. And, you can't just, I could have, for instance, told the American car companies, no, I'm not going to give you anything. And then you wouldn't have had to say, well, they're getting a little extra. It's just a little bit of a 1 month reprieve. They're very happy about what's happening. They won't have to go across borders, and you see the zigzag, and you have a fender made in Canada, you have something else made in Mexico. We don't want that. We want it made here. But there'll always be some modifications. I mean, if you have a wall in front of you, sometimes you have to go around the wall instead of through it. But I think very little. On occasion, if we can do something, we want to help companies. We want to help companies create jobs.
Anyway, I wanted to show that last part to kind of highlight the point that what people are really caring about right now is just like how chaotic this has become. Every other day, there's a new type of tariff. He's talked about steel and aluminum. He's talked about copper. He's talked about lumber. He's talked about China specifically. He's talked about Canadian dairy. It's been just enough to make people's heads spin. So in part, this is starting to have real world effects as well. In general, it's like markets don't like uncertainty, and this is kind of like maximum uncertainty. Not only is he doing things that markets don't like, but it's really not clear most of the time what he even means. He said it's exempt on all goods outside of the USMCA. Are there goods outside of the USMCA? And that's something people are really not sure. Are my goods going to be tariffed or not? Am I going to have higher prices or not? And it doesn't help that we've had this ongoing narrative that this idea of like U.S. exceptionalism. So the dollar is very strong. The U.S. stock market's doing very well. The U.S. bond market as well has been doing pretty good. Yields have been falling. And, in contrast to the rest of the world over the past few years, you look at European equities, they've been pretty flat to down over like the past few years now. China has a litany of financial problems. Really, the U.S. has been seen as like the only place to invest for like the better part of a year now, until kind of this week. And when Trump got elected, that supercharged that idea, like, okay, we're going to get a new president. He's going to be very business friendly. He's going to cut down on regulation. He talks about tariffs, but he's probably just bluffing. But this week, we kind of got a sign that, all right, no, it's like he means business. Maybe he just doesn't want people to think he's bluffing anymore, even if he just takes a couple days to show that he was bluffing. But financial markets have started to get pretty upset at this. And separately, U.S. economic data itself has started to also slow down a little bit. So joblessness has begun to rise a little bit. We talked in a previous one about how inflation has begun to tick back upward a little bit. So you take all these things and this just kind of crazy back and forth on tariffs, you've got a lot of uncertainty, and people are not really so happy with Trump anymore, at least as it's today.
In terms, I guess like a couple reaction points I had. First one had to do with like the markets not liking something. I kind of took, what does that mean exactly? I don't know. The market's just a bunch of people, I guess, buying and selling stuff.
Right.
The fact that there is a lot of uncertainty in there just means that some people who speculate can make some money. The fact that if they're just calm or whatever, and, people who analyze stocks or commodities or whatever sort of under the gun for that day is something to talk about and think about and make a, try to monetize or, try to make a bet, or they just go out and they get a future and lock in a certain price or whatever. That's like my first reaction, the idea that the market cares. The market's not a thing. But then the other half of that is like, well, businesses do. And when people are like in charge of trying to make a business decision, they certainly care about stability. And I'll say like a little bit of an anecdote. I remember, in my earlier life, I spent time in Russia and China. And one of the kind of the biggest lessons that I learned while living there had to do with, what do businesses really, like if a business were to make a decision about what market to go into, what's the first thing that they consider? And you might ask them, I would do this after I got back, and I would ask an American, someone I was studying with or something at the time, ask them what would they look for, and they might say,
like the big market size.
They might say the market size. They say, they have an educated workforce. Yeah, and it's just like, is that the first thing? And they get it all wrong, because the answer, and it's a lesson that the Chinese and the Russians know very well, the first thing is stability. And that's what Putin gave. That's what the Communist Party gave. Financial, economic, political, legal stability. So point taken. Point about the markets, a little different. Curious to know, though, this has only been a couple months. I mean, businesses' decisions take months, sometimes themselves, if they want, in terms of like a serious investment. So this is going to be roiling, I guess, for a little bit. It sounds like month by month.
It will be. And in fact, that's actually something that Trump has begun saying. He's been acknowledging that we're going to see some short-term pain here. He said that during his first big address earlier this week. It wasn't the State of the Union, but it was like the first address to Congress. But that was a big deal. Like, he doesn't admit defeat or really concede on anything. But on this one, he's saying, yeah, we're going to see some short-term pain here. And people ask him how much pain, what, and he just kind of, we'll be fine. It's like,
we're working this out. Okay. There's going to be a little bit of friction. Okay. Just sit tight. We'll get through this. It is pretty amazing, though, to be honest. Like, when I was younger, I didn't really appreciate this, but after you're watching this for a few decades, how quickly like seemingly huge crises can just kind of be blown under the rug, and how quickly that happens. And I don't think anyone probably understands that better than Trump. And we just see this,
both like how quickly they can start, and
then just kind of forget about it or something. So, the news cycle is measured in like hours nowadays. If you just kind of move on and people forget about it. I don't know. And we're playing a longer game here, maybe.
Definitely. And so that's also a part of it. Some of the more level hands in his administration, like Scott Bessent, he's a very well-spoken, I think, very deliberate. He's
Treasury Secretary.
Yeah, Treasury Secretary. And he's been emphasizing this point. We're going to see some short-term pain here for the long-term gain. And in fact, it's like people are talking about this idea of like the Trump put. If the stock market falls too low, Trump kind of offers you a put option. Like if it hits a certain point, he's going to do something to make it start going up again. So that was something that was seen in his first term a lot. It was clear that he really cared about the stock market. Someone did some analysis that over his first term, like over his tweeting, he mentioned the stock market over his first year or something like that, or first few months, over like 100 times. And so far he's done it, I think, 1 or 2 times. And in person too, he's been downplaying that a little bit. Someone asked him point blank, is this real? Like, what, you see the market tanking, like, what do you think? And he said, no, I'm not even looking at the market. And that's the same thing that Besant says. He said, in fact, there's not going to be a Trump put, there's going to be a Trump call. And so that's the messaging that he's been hammering home, related, but a little bit separate, like not to the stock market. Trump just cared about the stock market. It's an easy thing to see. It's not really that reflective of like underlying fundamentals. Whereas Besant, you can tell he kind of convinced Trump of this, in fact. He's really hammered home the point of the 10-year Treasury yield. That's really the key metric that he is looking at. And so just as like a brief reminder,
Interesting.
The 10-year Treasury yield is like what all of global finance is indexed off of. So certainly in the US, like any home mortgage, any auto loan, any business loan, all of these things are indexed off of the 10-year Treasury rate. So if that thing falls by 1%, that is just a huge benefit to consumers. So that's what Besant has really been pushing. He said, we don't care about the stock market. We care about the 10-year. And in fact, the 10-year yield has fallen quite a bit since Trump has taken office. So Besant's been trying to do some victory laps on that, but it just hasn't worked yet because all this other tariff stuff, uncertainty, and
interesting. Yeah, the cost of long-term borrowing. Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. We might, that'd be an interesting side note to just break down all the things that are pushing down that number and what would push it up. Because I think there is a general understanding that certainly with Doge and just kind of the speed at which, if you do wanted to bring factory jobs back into the country, or you want to spur investment, all that growth isn't going to happen tomorrow or the day after. We're talking months, weeks. Sorry, we're talking months, years. Before you sort of see the fruit of that labor. But what will happen immediately, and I think what's supposed to happen as soon as possible, is the spending cuts. And that's going to be a drag on GDP. We're trying to get off, we have been addicted to credit and we're trying to get off it, and it's going to hurt. Like, so this is kind of the other thing where I was kind of like, all this talk about growth and prosperity while you're cutting a whole bunch of spending and while you're raising tariffs. It sounds like those are pretty big drags, because the other thing we haven't talked about are the Trump tax cuts. And like, I would be also curious to see just the magnitude of the spending relative to the tax cuts, and if it's like 1-to-1, which I don't think it is. I mean, if you want to get the deficit down, net, it's got to be, we have to go into austerity.
That's a common view. But nowadays, the things that politicians typically say, Republican or conservative politicians, is that if you reduce the tax rate, you're going to increase revenue on net because you're going to encourage more investment. You're going to encourage more companies to come in to the country. You're going to encourage more activity rather than discourage it. So there really is this kind of push and pull there. It's really not super clear.
Yeah. And I'm sure you could find data and studies that support either side.
Exactly.
I think I guess the biggest question mark I would have to be around the timing. I mean, if you cut taxes today, do you necessarily get the money back today, or do you get that supposed increase in tax revenues a year from now, 2 years from now? And like over a long enough time span, depending how you build the model and the analysis, I'm sure you can make the argument, because there's so much noise in there anyway.
Right. And like you said, it's
long
like
story short, I don't think anyone
decision.
really knows. We're just marshaling arguments that support our own intuition, which is what arguments really are there for anyway. But thanks, Jonathan Haidt. Hat off. Took that from you.
For what it's worth, this is what the stock market has been doing. So this was the election. So as the election occurred, it shot right up about 5%. Then between his waiting to come into office, it's just kind of bumped around back and forth, pretty flat. And then once he took office, it was okay. It's, we're off to a good start, but as time goes on here, people are starting to get a little nervous, a little jittery. We're starting to go down. And then this week, it just accelerates that trend a little bit. We've currently lost all the gains that we got in the immediate aftermath of the election.
Yeah. Do you support that? How do you feel about that?
I personally don't really care because I don't think equities are a good measure of these things. It's only a measure of just how much people are panicking on a single day.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't mind it so much. I mean, I'm generally kind of a conservative, not politically conservative, but financially. So like the fact that we would go into austerity is good, net. I'm all for it. And the fact that the stock market doesn't like it, quote unquote, and that means that they go down, fine. The other thing I'd ask is like, remember this is like,
but it's not austerity necessarily. I think that's a much stronger word. Like, do you mean tariffs kind of imply austerity?
I was thinking, I still think in my head more Doge, just general spending cuts.
Yeah, I mean, even that one's tricky because there's been some drama around that recently as well. And
maybe I should. Maybe I'll cover that. That's definitely. I'm interested. I like Doge.
Yeah, so there was actually an article from the failing New York Times today. So take that for what you will. But
you're listening to too much Trump lately, I think.
No, I am. They gave this inside account or whatever. Apparently earlier this week, according to sources, apparently there was this big blow up between Elon and a number of the cabinet members, specifically Marco Rubio. Actually, apparently Elon came out swinging and was like criticizing a lot of the cabinet members in front of Trump and everybody. And it said that Trump was kind of hands off and then just tried to let people fight it out a bit and then tried to kind of smooth everything over. But then
this wasn't one of the public ones. He didn't talk. We don't have any idea. Like he didn't tweet something.
Yeah, this is behind closed doors apparently. But
of course,
yeah, they pointed to though.
Man, I would love to see those personalities rip into each other.
Trump made a comment like, Doge will now be using a scalpel instead of a chainsaw. And he also made a comment saying that personnel decisions will now be up to the head of the department and not to the Doge team. So there are, but that was always
the case. Doge was only giving recommendations. Maybe it was just how.
Yeah, I don't know for sure.
Supposedly, look, I'm not in the room. But that's okay.
But anyway, I just thought that was kind of an interesting tidbit, but it's just kind of possibly downplaying how much spending cuts we're really going to get. It's like if you cut out some waste and fraud, they said they've found like 50 billion or something so far, and to the overall, like 1% of the budget is about $300 billion. That would make a pretty good dent on the yearly budget, but that's 300 billion. Apparently they've found 50 so far. So it's not clear how much more they're going to be able to find that's just like obvious fraud, like the super low hanging fruit, especially if it is getting a little bit contentious in how they're going about things. And
yeah, maybe I'll cover that next week. I'll spend some time digging into it. Because Doge, they're super transparent and they're putting all the receipts up there. But even me, who's like interested in this stuff, can't find the time to like really dig into it. So maybe that would be some value add for the viewers of the podcast. Cool. Yeah. That's intense. It was pretty good.
It seems like he does want to get away from this a little bit because it is taking up a lot of time and energy, and there are a lot of things going on in the world, not even to say anything about all these wars happening that he wants to stop. I would think that he kind of wants to get to this reciprocal tariff thing that like he put an April 2nd deadline on. At that point, he can kind of just leave this alone for a little bit. So I'm going to be really interested to see, does he really do that? Or is this about something else? Is he just going to keep hitting individuals, causing drama? To me, I think he's going to do that, and then so he can focus only on China in terms of trade.
All right, good stuff. Thanks for tuning in to the Root of All Evil podcast. I'm Luke.
I'm Joe.
And
another week of tariffs for you.
Yeah. We'll see you next week.
See you next time.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.